I plan to drop as many Star Wars references as humanly possible.
Ba, 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 ba.
Segment. Solid segment, by the way. I really liked that one. Getting funky. 70s.
You do you, okay?
Well, I think if we want to inject a little bit more of the fun.
Podcast.
All right. Should we start a podcast? No, podcast. Let's do a podcast.
Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and I'm joined by your co-host, Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, how you feeling today?
Doing well, Scott. Happy to be here. Another day, another dollar, I think people say. No, happy to be here. Falcon of the Winter Soldier wrapped up last week. That was fun. Everything's just moving along, other than the fact that we're still in a stay-at-home order in Ontario. But hey, here we are.
Yeah, how did you like Falcon and Winter Soldier? I'll get that one out there. Like, what was your take on that one? I know we it's a learning podcast, but we like to have a little fun too.
Falcon and Winter Soldier. I think that I've watched a lot of like reaction videos to it and like inside scoop, and I think that they had to rewrite the whole thing. I think there is just a lot of parts in it where I think they rewrote the whole show. And the rumor is there was a reference to vaccines in the first episode. By the way, I don't want to go too far down a Falcon and Winter Soldier rabbit hole, but there was a reference to vaccines in the first episode, and then they never talked about vaccines ever again. And it just concerns me that potentially they had a different plot that maybe was around a virus or something, and maybe they didn't want to publish that. So
Makes sense. Yeah, my takeaway was very much that it was it felt like they didn't, or they maybe had a storyline they wanted to go down, or that was originally written, and then they didn't stick to it. They sort of reacted, and a lot of it seemed very written for the moment, not written for like a story arc. That was so like,
yeah,
it was very culturally like on point, but I just didn't feel like it was. There were a lot of inserted parts that felt sort of heavy-handed to get a message out, which is, again, it's a platform. It's great to use that, but I don't know. It didn't feel like it was all really like cohesive to just a normal story arc for a Marvel thing.
Yeah, I thought they did a great job, which they've blatantly said these shows are intended to set up the rest of the universe. So they did a great job giving Sam a great arc, Bucky a great arc, Sharon a great arc, and everything like that. So the action was good. Hillary preferred WandaVision's just way more. I'm very excited for June 11th, though. The Loki show looks fantastic.
Yeah, I like that there's all this stuff coming out. All right. Well, we divulged a little bit there, and we actually have a fun question I thought we'd insert as well. But today we are going to be talking about, we've been talking a lot about social learning and the idea of learning as a community. We want to dive into maybe some real world scenarios where you probably learn socially and maybe don't think about it, or just to kind of tie some connection points back to some real life scenarios. And why those are important. So that's going to be our topic for today. But without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, we said we wanted to start off the show with a quick question, and we thought it'd be a little dive into Daniel and I and our past and maybe what got us here. But the question is, who is or do you have a favorite teacher from some point in your childhood or your young adult life? That you can reference back, that maybe either is just someone that you really liked, maybe someone that kind of changed your direction on or thinking on education, or maybe just set you down a career path, maybe even that you anticipated. So I'll let you go first, Daniel. Do you have a favorite teacher, and what about them made them special for you?
I have two little tidbits, and I was thinking about this. They're pretty funny. So my fourth grade teacher, when I lived in Florida, she was great, but I'm pretty sure in hindsight, I just had a really big crush on her. I started thinking about this, and my mom provided me feedback that she's just very sure that I had a big crush on her. So I decided to go look for a different teacher after this, but I don't know if she's listening, but hey, maybe I had a big crush on her. Her name was Mrs. Otterburn. My mom said I cried when she got married, so probably was right.
Wow.
But no, my favorite teacher that I had was a grade 11. Sorry, you could tell my Canadian's coming out. A grade 11 and 12 accounting and business teacher that I had in high school. Her name was Mrs. Brooks. Um, and she really directed me down the business path in university, and she was I was always very intrigued during her classes, and was very kind of captivated by the information I was giving. It actually made me choose and want to concentrate in accounting. I quickly changed that after about 3 university accounting classes, because I was just like, no, thank you anymore. But she definitely guided me in that direction and kind of helped me with a path of how I wanted to expand, how I learned. She also allowed me to learn and approach school the way I felt it was best for me, which I think was one of the most rewarding things that I had from her. So, Mrs. Brooks.
Very nice. I have two as well. I don't have one that was a huge crush for me, but I'm sure I had one when I was in elementary school. But mine are actually both from high school. Well, I had great teachers in college and everything else, and I remember a lot of like the classes and things. But there were two that stood out for me. And the first one was Mrs. Frazier, who was my biology, anatomy, general science teacher all through high school. I think I had her every year. And for me, I have a background in science, and she sparked a lot of that thinking for me. It's interesting that she would be in this type of segment because she once accused me of cheating with my best friend on a project. And the reality is, what we were doing was we were doing the project like at the same time in the same room and talking about what the project was and like ideas and generating. So we were actually kind of almost performing some social learning, but in the end, our projects came out looking very much the same because we were doing them at the same time in the same place. So that was fun. And then my second one is Mr. Statham, who was my chemistry teacher in high school. And for him, the reason he stands out is, and probably is a big chunk of like why I do what I do today, is he let us have a tremendous amount of fun in class. There was a lot of joking and it was very lighthearted. And his bonus questions on quizzes were like pop culture music reference type stuff. And he just instilled in me that like, and look, I learned a lot in his class too. It's not that it was just all fun and games, but I learned that learning doesn't have to be starched and it doesn't have to be dry, and we can have some fun with it from time to time. And for me, like that always resonated, that class was one I enjoyed going into, and I learned a lot. It ended up also shaping my career or my educational interests in science and things, but just bring some fun to learning. And I think that for me made learning much easier, and I probably retained more out of it. And it's always kind of stuck out for me that was always a thing. So yeah, a lot of good times in both those, but those are the two that sparked me both in my interest and then keeping learning fun. All right, so we asked that question in part just to have a little dialogue and share a little bit about our background, and we did obviously a lot of name dropping there. So hopefully, Miss Brooks, Miss Frazier, and Mr. Statham, you are avid listeners of the podcast, or maybe we'll hunt you down and just give you a shout out on social media. But it also leads into one of the great examples we have on how social learning is important, or ways it might be effective, or things that you can think about both from an organizational perspective, but things that you've probably never really maybe put the connecting dots together. Is a great teacher or a mentor or a coach is a great impact to your learning, and it ultimately is a form of social learning. So this gives you somebody to bounce ideas off of, to share thoughts. It gives you somebody to help motivate you, to push you forward, or give you direction and facilitate your learning. And ultimately, I think those are things that if you can find a great teacher or a great mentor, while that often is maybe more formalized learning in a lot of senses, if it's someone that you go to outside of the bounds of the classroom or outside of the general like formality of scheduled training or something like that, and you continue to have that relationship, that then transforms and becomes that social learning, and potentially even that informal learning where you continue to grow as a person who's seeking knowledge or seeking understanding. And so I think great teachers and mentors impact your social learning and your learning in general by helping to influence who you become.
Mentorship is one of those things that I think you don't know you actually benefit or need a mentor in a lot of ways until you have one. You kind of go about it, and it's just fantastic from the sense of you realize that you have a thinking partner and you have somebody to hold you in check and guide you down path and bring experience. So it's just so beneficial to help shape where you can go. I love the term that I've heard used around, and I just used it around mentors, which is thinking partner. You also hear sounding board and those sorts of things, but it allows you to bounce ideas off of someone who really has no bias and is just going to speak to you from opinion and experience, and make sure that a true mentor really helps make sure you're going down your own path in the right way and can learn and adapt in certain ways. And I think mentorship is so important in any process. I mean, I have mentors in my work life. I have mentors in my coaching life. And as I've gotten older, I look at individuals who are similar to me and try to be mentors to them, because I know how much I've benefited myself from that, expanded type of learning.
One of the I heard a perspective on mentorship, and it applies whether we call it mentor or coaching or teacher or whatever. I think the terminology is a bit fluid, but Simon Sinek, I was listening to him talk about mentorship, and that he has a great mentor that he discovered over time. And one, it can be very formal and like you asked for someone to be a mentor, but it can also be very informal in terms of conversational. It just grows over time. And one of the things he talked about was that it was a great surprise for him that the person he considered to be his mentor told him that through their partnership and their conversations, the reverse had also happened. So the mentor in that relationship, or his perception of a mentor, actually went the other way, and his mentor thought of him as a mentor to him as well, right? So a great mentorship partnership isn't unilateral or one directional. One Direction being one of Sabrina's favorite bands. I think I saw her eyes perk up on that a little bit, but small drop in there. But that, if you have that great partnership, just because you're being coached doesn't mean some of what you're doing in that dialogue isn't also coaching back to the other person. And whether that's helping them be a better coach or be a better leader or to think differently, to challenge some of the ways they teach, I think it becomes a bidirectional approach. And again, that's where that social learning comes in. And when we talk about like informal capabilities, like I consider Daniel to be one of my mentors, not because I think of him as being, above me on some org chart or whatever, but just we dialogue constantly. And like, I pick up things from the way maybe the sales and marketing side of our business comes in. And I would hope that in the same sense, sometimes he's picking up things that I talk about in terms of learning strategy or the approach of a client perspective from that, like, because I was that person for so long with us. And so like, I think mentorships form in all different kinds of ways, whether you formally walk up to somebody and say, hey, will you be my mentor? Now I'm having a Mr. Rogers vibe. Will you be my mentor? And then, or is it something where just over time you form a relationship and a bond that over some kind of common functionality? So I think mentorship, coaching, training, teaching, all of that stuff is just immensely beneficial.
I think you mentioned informal learning. And by the way, Scott, thank you. And I do learn quite a bit from our talks. Sometimes it's about stuff not related to work, but regardless, I think what you touched on there about the informal or the informality of it is something that makes mentorship more genuine than a specific coach or teacher, which is why I value mentorship so much, is because typically mentorship comes from you reaching out to somebody who you look up to or admire or like what they've done, or, depending on what level, and asking some questions and starting a dialogue. And then that usually nowadays it turns into a conversation back and forth on Twitter or something like that in the comments of some article. And those things can grow. I think sometimes that specific, will you be my mentor, creates a hierarchy that you addressed. And like you said, even with me with coaching, I feel like I'm learning more potentially from my players some days than they're learning from me, just because, and they're just constantly driving in the right direction. So that informality of it, I think the authenticity of mentorship is such an advantage to add to your day-to-day. And I think it's a really great, going back to kind of where we've been this past month, a great way to take informal learning and kind of add it to your day-to-day.
All right, so this show is all about bringing other great real world scenarios to life that maybe make you think about the way social learning can impact your day to day life. And the one that that I think probably resonates the most, or just quickly comes to mind, is we've probably all tried to tackle a New Year's resolution at some point. And typically that New Year's resolution is that we're going to be more healthy, we're going to get more fit, and we want to exercise more and eat right. And probably some of us have done this in a vacuum, just us. And I think we all recognize that that can be really hard when it's just you who's trying to get healthier and do it. And one of the things that helps that journey be more successful is to get yourself a workout partner or an accountability partner. Working out, going to the gym with someone is one, just often more fun because you can giggle and laugh and share stories and talk. But also it gives you that sense that someone else is going to be disappointed if you don't go. And so the idea that having someone to work out with or to share that kind of journey or that adventure or that process even with just naturally makes it more successful generally. And I think when we think about social learning, the same is true. When you learn with other people, they hold you accountable. They motivate you to keep learning, to push the boundaries, to not just accept the first information given to you, but to think more critically. And so I think that it's just a natural connection that helps with your learning capability or retention by learning with others.
I'm not sure if anybody else got a little like vision in their head of Scott giggling
while working out
when he said the word giggle, but I did. And anyways, I thought it's funny. But no, I truthfully, Scott, I think I agree with you 100% there. I think accountability is something that inherently comes from partnership or group. I know that I've mentioned before that I'm going through my A license right now, and we kind of have a mentorship group. So underneath kind of our key instructor in my coaching license, I have a group of 6 individuals or 7 individuals who we meet weekly with one of the other coach mentors. And that keeps me accountable for doing my group work and completing my reflection journals and my personal development plan and all those sorts of things to keep me driving in the right direction, which is just another example. But working out is 100% a huge positive. I know that I've slipped and fallen off a little bit in the past few weeks since the stay-at-home order has happened because I haven't had a workout buddy and a workout partner. So it's definitely a big part of that. And I think relating to your everyday life in terms of learning and growing, it's where if you take concepts of gamification and competition and all of those sorts of things and relate them to accountability, they allow you to want to compete and want to learn and want to be engaged because of a little bit of accountability from competition. And competition is a great driver of accountability and action.
Yeah, you mentioned me giggling in the gym, and that's probably because I spent most of my time trying to find ways to not work out, but to sit and tell stories and joke around in the gym. But I think the other side of that too, and you mentioned like the competition side of it, is once you get into that rhythm and you've got that person that you trust with keeping you accountable and things like that, it also pushes you to always sort of one up each other or to keep the momentum going towards your growth process, right? And raising that bar a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and challenging each other to do one more rep or to, push a little bit, put more weight on or, go a little longer or whatever that is. And if you're a runner or whatever, you're always trying to up the ante a little bit more and keep that momentum of growth going. And I think once you're in that flow, it's just natural. It's common. And I think, again, the same is true of learning. If you learn one thing, you're going to keep working to try to say like, oh, I learned another tidbit, and you want to start sharing and coaching and teaching other people about the little thing you learned on the new article you read or whatever. I think that momentum is a natural way. And once you've got that momentum going, it's actually hard to stop. I think you keep naturally going. And so it's great to have that accountability partner that helps you along that way. All right, so having an accountability partner obviously is a great way to keep you on track. But another option where you can work with others that we're probably at least somewhat familiar with, and we had a debate on whether or not this is still a culturally current reference, but is the idea of something like a book club. And it could be, insert other kind of topic here. But the idea that as a group, you're going to experience something, perhaps reading a book, going to a museum together, going to a lecture series, watching a TED Talk, whatever they might be, and having the opportunity to then discuss or dialogue about what you took away from it. And what we want to really talk about here, and the way this comes to light from a great experience, is it helps you see things from somebody else's perspective. So we can all read the same book and take away different concepts on the narrative, or we can like different characters because we thought they were developed in certain ways, but our own, maybe it's personal biases, our own past experiences, will often dictate the way you see those people or that dialogue or that plot, in a way. And then when you start to talk about that, you start to see things from kind of outside of your own view. And I think that just helps you sort of build a more robust version of your own take or your own belief in what you read, or your own takeaways, what you thought were key messages. And if you're really having an open dialogue with those folks, you're hopefully also willing to change your perception. So maybe the thing you took away, you're like, man, I never saw it from that other way. That actually reframes your own point of view in many ways. So I think having a group that helps you see things differently is a great thing, as long as you're open-minded to the conversation.
I think that's one of the great positives, I think, of way things are run in terms of developing subcommittees or groups within different parts of organizations that have open conversations and dialogue around certain topics. I know Scott, the strategy department, kind of coordinates what we call the mine at Halite, is where a lot of research and R&D and groupthink occurs. But even when we develop large initiatives on new products, new initiatives, updates to our website or our marketing and branding, we try to bring different people with different thought processes from different areas of the organization and ask questions and get perspective. Because we've talked about this, I think, throughout this entire month, around the idea of community and social learning, and perspective is probably the greatest thing I believe that social learning and this sort of idea generation can bring to you. And perspective allows your mind and your thought processes and your creativity and your innovation and all those sorts of things to kind of grow and expand as your perspective grows and expands. So that sort of collaboration, I think, is something you can't get in a formal setting. You can't get it from taking an e-learning or attending a webinar maybe, but attending a session. It's really just that collaborative, authentic, organic opinion and perspective from others that these sorts of things drive. And by the way, Scott, I know I mentioned this in our planning session. Book clubs do exist. They're the books necessarily aren't paperback or hard copy. They might be on your Kindle or somewhere else, but book clubs still exist. They're a thing. I think Reese Witherspoon has a very famous one. My wife likes Reese Witherspoon's book club. But also I know that a lot of teams and things use book clubs as ways to bond and grow and build culture as well. So book clubs are a thing still.
Well, historically, Oprah Winfrey always had a book club, so she was a very big name. And I know actually Andrew Luck, former quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, hosts a book club, or at least he used to. So in the not so recent past. So the other great part, and just you talked about the organizational side of this that I think is worth highlighting as well, is when you invite those other groups and you build a committee or you work cross-functionally across departments, when you break down those silos of your own, if you're the L&D team, you only work with the L&D team, it gets really hard to understand the world that's going on in the business around you. So building those groups or committees or cohorts or whatever allows you to get a picture of what's happening in another department. And it helps you understand what their goals and objectives are, so that you can write better training if you're on the L&D side, or if you're on the finance side, understanding what the sales side is doing, so that you can better budget for them and on their behalf. And you become an advocate for the people who are in other parts of your business in your own day-to-day job. And I think ultimately that's going to build a culture. Sure, a learning culture can be impacted by that, but just a culture for your organization makes a huge difference when I'm advocating for other groups in my own work, so that they're advocating back for me, And ultimately, you're getting more cohesiveness. Your communication flow is going to be better. You're not going to have people that are confused around what's going on. And they're not going to make decisions that ultimately negatively impact another department because they're thinking with that department's perspective in mind when they try to make the best decisions possible. So I think there's business benefits there as well, but the learning benefit of seeing other people's perspective is huge. All right, so while we've learned that book clubs are still a thing, and we're really excited about that, there's definitely one topic that Daniel and I have we've broached the subject a little bit on the podcast, but it's something we spend quite a bit of time on, and I think holistically across the globe, it's become one of the more popular activities and hobbies for a lot of people. So I think the connection will make sense is the idea of fantasy sports. So fantasy football specifically for the two of us. But people play fantasy baseball, fantasy golf, fantasy NASCAR. It's the idea of fantasy sports in general is very, very popular right now. And one of the things that we think you can take away from that experience and bring back to your learning world is the idea of critical thinking. So Daniel and I regularly debate this player versus that player, or is this player going to be great, or is this player going to be a bust, or what would this trade look like, or all of these little things. And there's all this nuance. And if you play fantasy sports, you've probably had this dialogue 100 times with the people that you play with. And the reality is, every time you have that conversation, Dan and I are not frequently aligned on our take on that player or the scenario, but we have to justify it to each other, and we have a dialogue back and forth. And ultimately what we're doing is we're thinking critically about the situation. And I think that's an important part of social learning when it comes to the idea that we can bounce ideas off of each other, and we have to evaluate our stance, and we have to be able to justify it back to others, which helps you teach back. And as we've discussed in many other parts of the podcast, when you have to teach back, that improves your retention. So learning is a benefit of social learning simply by having to think critically about your stance.
I mean, fantasy football I was thinking in my head, like, when is it going to start? Because I have to redeem myself with you, Scott, after you beat me in the finals last year.
I did. Champion
of your league. I realize you're a champion. I think if you think about right now and using football as the example, the NFL draft is coming up right now, which is basically the same thing we go through as in fantasy football, but stakes are a lot higher for those general managers.
There's a few more dollars on the line, yeah.
But I was listening to analysts talk yesterday about how a team traded up to get a higher pick, and they did it to get a certain player, and everybody disagrees. Just like when the Browns took Baker Mayfield back a few years, number one, and all of that kind of thinking and groupthink around those topics in those organizations, inside those rooms, you have to justify your opinion and your thoughts on the direction you're going against a coach and a GM and an owner and assistant coaches and captains and all of those things. And it just drives kind of getting you to a point where you're in a great place. I know that if I look back to the business side of things, in my role as in sales and marketing, I'm always looking at marketing initiatives or new product pricing structures and that like that. When I bring in others and I think I have this perfect pricing structure that we can bring to everybody and it's going to be fantastic, and then the team gets in the room and just destroys it, it makes me justify why we're pricing things some way, not just in my own head. And that justification is good. It's one of the reasons why I value product demos and sales pitches so much, because the feedback is inherent. It makes me understand our product more, because you have to critically think, you have to justify your opinion. You can't just do things in a vacuum. And going back all the way back to, we talked about accountability, mentorship, coaches, having a thinking partner across any sort of process, a decision-making process, a brainstorming process. Having a thinking partner is going to allow you to look deeper into that perspective we mentioned and allow you to justify your thoughts and opinions, or have them proven incorrect and allow you to dig deeper and learn more. And it's just also critical in terms of, being successful and being confident in what you're producing, what you're thinking, kind of what you're talking about.
Come on, get happy.
All right, we do it every day about this time. It is Positivity Point. We want to share a little bit of what gets us energized and excited recently, and just bring a little happiness, hopefully, back to the population. So, Daniel, what do you got on the docket for today?
I have two. One
Ooh,
just kind
nice.
of popped up this morning, but I have, a twofer. Gotta get happy. This morning I decided, I woke up, the weather's getting nice. I went outside, put the garbage out. It was really, really nice outside. I came upstairs to a screaming Oakley who had just woken up. So I took her and I said, you know what? I'm going to go for a walk this morning. So I took Oakley out. She was wearing her jammies still. It's still in her pajamas. She threw on her sunglasses, which she's obsessed with wearing sunglasses right now. Had her apples and her milk, and we went for a nice little father-daughter walk this morning. And honestly, it sounds little, but it was just this like heartwarming activity that I really enjoyed this morning. So that was not intended to be my positivity point for the day, but it was a great start to my day, and I feel energized because of it.
I dig it.
So that's number one. Number two, next week, you may notice if you watch us on YouTube that I will have a different setting for the podcast. And no, I'm not going on vacation, but all this construction and the rescheduling that I've put in place for the recording of the podcast, which you guys don't see, but Sabrina and Scott have had to deal with for the past 7 weeks. The basement is supposed to be done on Friday. And I'll be moving furniture downstairs, and I should be in my my basement home office. I'm not going to call it a man cave, but I will. I'm going to game in there and other things. But my basement home office will be complete. Should be complete for the recording of the podcast next week, and I'm really looking forward to a little bit of a new setting, not being next to the nursery. So client demos during nap time won't happen anymore because that's been fun. So definitely excited about the basement being complete.
Very nice. Mine also is going to lead into next week, and I'll leave us with a teaser before we finish up. But I have a mini twofer, if you will. One is that I received some permission for those that have maybe seen the change in my background here. I was allowed to nerd out slightly. Not a lot. It needed to be tasteful and well organized and clean, but a little bit of my nerd passions over here. We've got some Harry Potter, some Legos, Star Wars, sports, comic books, but I was able to add a bookshelf to the background, so I feel like I'm always happy when I see myself on video now that my wall is not some weird mix of just boxes and things. So I got a little organized, but you'll notice there's a shelf here that has Star Wars on it. And as we lead into next week, and this is sort of a ramp up build, it's a week of positivity for me. Many of you know that next week is May the 4th. And there's a lot of my email boxes just getting inundated with look for all the great things coming from a Star Wars perspective. So this is Nerd Christmas for me, and I get really jazzed this time of the year, just because it's Star Wars all the time, and the world likes to send me emails about all the things that are coming. Admittedly, some of the sales are never quite as exciting as I hope they'd be, but I'm happy all the same. Lots of pictures, lots of fun, just seeing what's coming out. So that'll lead us up to a little bit of next week. We did talk about next week is May the 4th, so a quick teaser. Imagine there's going to be some puns, some references, and a good time next week had around just seeing how much Star Wars nerding out I can do. So all right, that will do it for us today. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendoza, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.